My friend Blois Olson with Fluence Media joining me as we continue our coverage of the verdict in the Derek Chauvin trial and the politics that have come into this case. With the jury coming back in less than 24 hours, let's start with the verdict. Guilty on all three counts, and I don't think it's a surprise by a lot of folks.
I don't think a lot of people are surprised, but I think it's like election night. You just never know what's going to happen. But I think you can feel just a massive collective sigh. No matter what people thought, what people felt, I think there's a relief that this is our best chance for peace in our communities in the near term, for sure.
Do you think that played into this with jurors? Of course, they're supposed to only take the facts of the case into their deliberations, but you and I both know, as being human, you can't argue with the fact that there was a lot more at stake than just one man's future.
There was a lot at stake. I wouldn't pretend to put myself in the minds of any of these jurors and the heavy burden that they felt. However, I would say this: getting 12 people to unanimously agree on anything, much less three things, that quickly says that they must have found the case that the state made very compelling. And I think that's where everybody was here in the end. And when I say everybody, I mean kind of the collective populace thought it was headed that way, but still, you felt the tension and the anxiety before the judge read the verdict. I watched it with my son, and we just didn't know, and you just don't know. But I think the speed made people optimistic that this would be the result, and hopefully we can keep the peace.
Blois, do you think that Chauvin not taking the stand hurt him, or do you think the outcome could have likely been the same had he taken the stand in his own defense?
I think collectively the entire defense had some things that people wanted to hear more of. I think people wanted to hear from Chauvin. I also believe that people will analyze the defense ad nauseum, especially those people who are looking at ways in which they thought maybe Chauvin wasn't guilty. So I'm not a lawyer, but I am a communicator, and I think, in totality, that the prosecution just did a much better job presenting their case than the defense did.
And we never claim that you are a legal expert by any means. You are our political analyst. Politically speaking, this has taken a lot of different twists and turns as well. When we have top politicians from other states coming in to Minnesota, as we did over the weekend, Maxine Waters being one of them, that was concerning for sure. But the politics of this, give me your thoughts on that.
Look, the politics of race have been around for decades, but they are very focused right now and magnified right here in Minnesota. The police shooting of Daunte Wright more than a week ago continues to amplify that. It's going to amplify it even more. And so I think we're all taking a sigh today, but politically, the dynamics are not going to go away. Right now at the legislature and at the end of the session, the politics of police reform will be front and center, maybe even more heated, probably more disruptive than the politics of the budget, which is the #1 job of the legislature. In fact, it's going to play into every single omnibus bill, and specifically in the Minnesota House, the political dynamics there between some of the activists from the Posse Caucus that are legislators, and some of the more mainstream Democrats, and then on the Republican side, some of the more moderate Republicans and some of the more conservative Republicans. Getting all the votes together to pass a budget is probably going to have to be bipartisan. Otherwise, it's going to be a long, long summer.
The politics, not just of the Chauvin trial, but before the break, we were talking, Blois Olson with Fluence Media and I, speaking about the verdict in the Derek Chauvin trial. We're also talking about the political landscape here in Minnesota. And before we get into the session and where lawmakers are at with the budget and some of the other things, Blois, let's talk about the verdict in the Chauvin case and what this means for Governor Walz and, Operation Safety Net. There's been a lot of money put into the safety and security, and it looks like hopefully it will be a lot more peaceful than maybe anticipated.
I think that's really the thing that the verdict gives us some clarity on, is what maybe the next few days look like. But let's be clear, the state led by Governor Walz was prepared for the worst. And you can see it on the streets of Minneapolis, on the streets of St. Paul, throughout the metro area. But there's been political backlash from the left against Governor Walz and the two mayors about this. And in fact, some of the most liberal groups, the Minnesota nurses, some of the teachers groups, have called for an end to Operation Safety Net. Two DFL subgroups from the state level have had a resolution of no confidence in Governor Walz, and another may add to that tonight. And so the politics and the political implications for Walz related to the trial and the preparation for the trial are long-term.
Okay, but now that there's a verdict and we know moving forward kind of what is going to happen. I mean, he's going to be sentenced, and then this trial will somewhat be behind most people. But for Minnesota and the politics of this, can we now get to focus on the budget, the other issues that taxpayers in greater Minnesota want focused on?
I think so. Both the House and the Senate, as part of the usual process, are kind of staking their ground on the budget. We haven't gotten to reality yet, and we have about a month left in the regular session, and we have till July 1st to pass the budget to avoid a government shutdown. But I think they'll get there soon. As we look at the budget, Betsy, what we see is education plans from the House and the Senate and the governor that are very different. Transportation plans for the House and the Senate. They haven't started earnest negotiations on those numbers yet. And until they do, you don't really know how this is going to shape up. We always say that the train has to go off the tracks with the budget before you can put it all back together, or Humpty Dumpty has to fall off the wall. None of that's happened yet. I think the Chauvin verdict allows some of that to happen in the next week.
As we know, former Vice President and Minnesota native Walter Mondale died yesterday, and we've been hearing from our federal lawmakers on this. You wrote about his influence in today's Morning Take. Speak about that.
Well, I think just in this day and age, we have to be reminded of how humble and accessible Vice President Mondale was. You always look back and wonder how you wind up where you are. And my junior high was his presidential headquarters for media on Election Day in 1984, and I got a tour of that media center. I was also a paper boy at the time. And so, while I've met him a few times, we had plenty of conversations, you think about, as a 12-year-old, how that made an impression on me, where my career took me, and I have no doubt that having that in Minnesota was a clear influence. But overall, you think about our leaders today, our former vice presidents and presidents, and how accessible Walter Mondale was. People talk about how, he used to walk his dog around the lakes in Minneapolis without security, without any pretension. He didn't have a driver until later years in his life. And that's kind of a good reminder of history for us.
Wow. The way you describe him is how I see you, a humble man without much pretense. So for that, I will say thank you for talking with me, and we'll talk again next week.
Sounds great. Thanks, Betsy.
Thanks, Blois.